Hello, it's Dr. Kortni Alston of the Courting Happiness podcast. Have you checked out our happiness library? It's a carefully curated library with books that I highly recommend that are a must for your happiness library. Go to drkortnialston.com/happiness library. That's drkortnialston.com/happiness library. The authors you will hear on the podcast can also be found in our happiness library. You can also purchase their books on our site. On top of that, your purchase also helps this podcast and the mission of courting happiness. Let's spread happiness and the word. Check out books on the Courting Happiness Library. It will not only change your life, but it can also help you with your next chapter too. Let's get back to the podcast. Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a space where self-care becomes part of your day. A space where you learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Kortni Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Courting and Courting Happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with phenomenal people, the infusion of positive psychology, and so much more. You'll learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 40. We value inclusion on the Courting Happiness podcast. Matter of fact, it's one of our core values. Today, we have a special guest who is a diversity and inclusion powerhouse. Perrine Farque is a keynote and TEDx speaker who empowers professionals to become more inclusive leaders. She's one of the top 50 most influential women in UK tech. Perrine is also the founder of Inspired Human, a London-based diversity and inclusion agency specializing in helping organizations grow their businesses through diversity and inclusion. On top of that, Perrine is the best-selling author of the book Inclusion, the Ultimate Secret for an Organization's Success. Get ready to learn more about how inclusion can serve your organization and the importance of belonging at work. Perrine, thank you so much for being here. I have been extremely excited about having this conversation with you because I really value your work and also your message. I think it's so very important, especially now, right? In terms of value of inclusion and also the importance of making sure, as you mentioned in your TED Talk, in terms of understanding the table. We're going to talk about that a little bit in a moment. So let's talk about your book, Inclusion, the Ultimate Secret for an Organization's Success, which I agree as well. You shared a definition of inclusion and belonging, which I really value. Tell us, what is the difference and why does it matter in a positive workplace?
Yeah, and it's a great question, Dr. Kortni, so I appreciate the question. There is a slight nuance between inclusion and belonging. So inclusion is really a feeling. So inclusion is a feeling of being heard and seen and valued for who we are, especially in the workplace. Someone feels included when they feel they are being seen and heard and valued at work, with their team, with their boss. And like I said, it's a feeling more than an action. So although there can be acts of inclusion, such as inviting someone to a dinner, inviting someone to a meeting, asking someone what they think about the situation, inclusion really comes from a feeling inside a person. So it can't really be forced. It has to come from the person. And belonging has more to do with the identity of someone. So belonging is feeling part of a group that recognizes us as one of theirs. So belonging is even stronger. It's an even stronger connection than inclusion. We feel like we belong to a group. We feel like we belong to a company. We feel it's part of our identity, who we are. And so belonging is stronger. And so often inclusion and belonging go together. But as noted, for example, in the workplace, someone can feel included in the sense that they can feel heard and valued and respected and seen. They might not necessarily feel like they belong to the company. They might feel a great sense of inclusion with their colleagues, but they might not necessarily feel it's part of their identity. And so considering that inclusion and belonging are the foundation for a strong and cohesive community, and considering most of us spend the majority of our lives at work, inclusion in the workplace is key to create a positive workplace that has a positive that is a positive experience for everyone. So that's why my book, like you said, focuses on how we can create that inclusive workplace where everybody has a positive experience.
I love that because it's so important in regards to feeling seen and being seen, right? I really treasure what you shared, and also the value of how we feel. And it's important because you're right, we spend so much of our time at work. Is valuing a person in regards to making sure that they feel seen on the job, but then also honoring that feeling of making sure that there's a level of belonging, that they feel a part of the organization, and the organization is championing them, right, and also cheering them on as well. I love that in the book you talked about your time as a marketing manager, and you shared a time when you felt that you didn't belong. Tell us about that experience, and how did it help shape the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, and it's I think in my experience, inclusion is something that someone will feel over a period of time. It's not the type of thing that will happen suddenly, like suddenly, aha, I feel included. So it's a bit like a relationship, it's you can't I think we can't really pinpoint the moment we fall in love, or we can't really pinpoint the moment we feel included. It has to build over time. So I often talk about the small acts of inclusion, the small daily acts of inclusion that great leaders can do to make everybody feel included. And so, yes, I had an experience where when I was a marketing manager at a company and I did not feel included at all it was a various reason, it's lots of small acts that just did not happen. And I never had that basic layer of psychological safety, trust, feeling included. But there are small acts of inclusion that managers and team leaders and hiring managers can do every day to create that sense of inclusion. And things like they don't have to be small things. They don't have to be big things. They can be small things like unexpected gifts or tokens of appreciation. So an employee went above and beyond to do something really great. So the manager can send them a card, just a thank you card, say thank you for your work. Or it can be a quick daily check-in. Now that most of us live in remote work, just sending a text, how is it going? How are you today? Because actually my boss really cares about me. He's asking me how I'm doing today. That's really nice. And celebrating birthdays and work anniversaries, just remembering it's your birthday today, or celebrating the small wins. We don't have to wait for the big annual summit conference to be over to send a thank you card. It can be the small weekly achievement, and then asking as a leader, asking what the leader can do to help his or her team. Is there something I can do to help you? And also things like shutting down bullies. I think most of us have experienced bullies in the workplace. And it's very common that people don't really address bullies for various reasons, but inclusive leaders should really make an effort to stand up to harassment, bullies, discrimination, misconduct, and just zero tolerance and show a zero tolerance policy towards bullies. That's very important. And then getting to know the team. So really getting to know them. What do they like? What do my people like doing outside of work? What kind of things are they into? What kind of sports are they into? Those are small things, small acts of inclusion that inclusive leaders can do to create that sense of inclusion with their team.
Wow, you said so much. I'm sitting here as Perrine is speaking, I'm smiling. And then my eyes started to get wider when she talked about bullying and having a zero tolerance for bullies, because bullies create this toxic work culture, right? And it can be very challenging to create a culture of true belonging and inclusion when you have a bully or bullies, because it can also be plural, right, within an organization that is really kind of chipping away, right, at the foundation of positive or positivity within the workplace. What do you say to managers that have a bully or bullies, and how can they go about really protecting? Because I love what you shared in regards to honoring what I love, because of Maslow, safety, right? Having a safe environment. So what would you advise a manager in regards to protecting their environment and really having that zero tolerance for bullies? What would that look like?
It's a great point. It's a great question. Again, in my experience, to stand up to bullies at work, I think there are a couple of things that anybody can do at work to stand up to bullies and or to toxic leaders. And so it's not easy, let's face it. It's uncomfortable, it's difficult, but it has to be done. So the first step I would advise is to, like I said, it's not easy, but establish trust with the bully in question and use their competitiveness as a motivation. So let me explain. Rather than shutting them down completely, blocking them out and just stopping the conversation altogether, which can be very tempting, if there are bullies, trying to get to know them a bit better, establish trust in a positive way, in a growth mindset kind of way. So trying to establish trust with the person, get to know them, and understand them. And once you establish the trust with them, trying to start by making mild suggestions about their actions. And also, if they are competitive, because often they can be very competitive, hence why they are bullies, because they want to win at any cost. Try to explain how their actions, if they improve, it could improve their career. So really use their ambitions to motivate them. Be careful not to go too far with criticism, because it might backfire, but instead remind them that they have such great potential, and by improving just a little bit on their attitude, they can really make a huge improvement. So that's one first place to start. The second one would also be to leverage colleagues' feedback to make more collaborative suggestions, because many toxic leaders or individuals are actually, their vision is quite impaired. They don't perceive their action. They might be a bit biased. They don't really see how they behave. So it's getting them to admit that they have a problem in the first place could be the big challenge. So by getting more opinions and feedback than just yourself, you're getting more almost evidence, collecting more evidence and sharing it with them. So they almost have an aha moment. Oh, I never realized I came across this way. So really getting more feedback and sharing that with them. And then the third step is to get them to practice better behavior. So once you've established that trust with them and they trust you to give them genuine feedback to improve, try to give them some small sort of homework or tasks, such as, next time you give feedback, maybe try to be a bit more constructive or focus on areas of improvement rather than just the negative. So, and then if they fail, so just remind them unemotionally, removing emotion, just saying, okay, these are the facts. You failed to do that. And so that's another way to give them small tasks. And then one last point I would also say is try to develop explicit standards for inclusive leadership. So you might work with your HR team, for example, or your leadership team around what kind of behavior is expected. For example, in meetings, is it acceptable to interrupt people or not? Because once the standards are written on paper or in a policy, having explicit standard that we don't, in this company, we don't tolerate interruptions in meetings, that can really help sort of shut down any bully who is constantly interrupting, for example. So those are just steps that anybody really can use to address bullies and toxic leaders or toxic colleagues at work.
I also really value that you mentioned trust, right? In regards to kind of initiating that conversation. How can an leader or a manager or leader, how can they begin to develop that trust with their team?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think it goes back to the daily small acts of inclusion. The trust will not happen overnight. It won't happen, I did this thing yesterday, now they all trust me. That's not how it works. And by the way, if the trust is here today, it might be gone tomorrow. And I always use this metaphor of the metaphor of the relationship. It's the same. You have to work on it every single day. You have to be intentional. Intentional is the key, and mindful. And so the most inclusive leaders are constantly they're intentional. They do things that they're to build trust. They are the first one to ask for feedback. They will go to their team, say, can you give me feedback on my work? Can you give me feedback on my presentation? Because if you're the first one to ask for feedback, then people are more open to then receive feedback. They ask for help. How can I help you? No matter how busy they are, how can I help you? They're always here. If they make a mistake, they acknowledge it. That's really important, being humble, vulnerable. The best leaders, like anybody, make mistakes, and when they do, they acknowledge their mistake in public and they share it and say, I made a mistake, and they apologize and they learn from it. So very simple traits of great leadership: offering help, being the first one to ask to get feedback on their own work, acknowledging their mistakes. And the small things I mentioned earlier, celebrating birthdays, getting to know their team, really getting to know their team, being genuinely interested. Those are just the small daily things they can do. Checking in, how are you today? Not speak to your team for a week, for example. Checking in, make sure people are okay. So the basic. And also, you would be surprised when you have a meeting, a one-to-one, look the person in the eye, even if it's over Zoom, look at them in the eye over Zoom, say hello, ask them how they are doing. You'd be surprised nowadays how many people don't do those basic things of looking at you in the eye, saying hello, and asking how you are today. They just jump straight into the business, and then they're like, well, I don't understand why my team are not trusting me. I don't understand. We speak every day. Sure, but do you ask them how they are? Do you listen to them? So doing the small things every day is what is going to build trust over time.
It's interesting that you say that, because I remember when I was working as a faculty member for another institution, and I remember when I would, park my car and I would run into the dean, and he wouldn't just simply say, well, hello, you know he would wave and he would wait, and we would walk together. And how was your day? How was your weekend? And I loved when we would have these encounters, because I felt like during that walk, we were getting to know each other. And then on top of that, I felt so welcomed, because here he was, the dean. And so when he retired, I go, oh my gosh, he's retiring. But I was also cheering him on, because I thought, wow, this guy is so wonderful, because he took time out to really try to get to know me, at a very, well, some people would say a small scale, but I actually think it was a very big one. And the fact that he would kind of do that, I think I'm going to call it the wait and walk, right? He would wait for me, and then we would just do this walk together. Another thing I really treasure, Perrine, that you shared is our birthdays. And so I can recall being at a meeting, and it was my birthday month. Well, it was my birthday, and I can recall my birthday not even being acknowledged, but everyone else's was acknowledged. I was like, oh gosh. And but then I also did a comparison of how my other, supervisor, my other boss, would often take us out for our birthdays. And but I also, and so it's interesting to see those, as you mentioned, small acts
Mm-hmm.
that really make a big impact.
Mm-hmm.
I really treasure what you shared. So let's talk about depreciation. I
Yeah.
love that you mentioned that in your book, because we often hear about appreciation, right?
Yeah.
And now let's talk about depreciation. Explain to us what that is and what can a manager do in terms of making sure that their team really feels appreciated.
Yeah, great question. Because depreciation is basically the opposite of feeling included, right? So it's when you're not feeling included, you're not feeling like you belong, you're feeling rejected, you're feeling depreciated, which is the worst. So what can managers do to avoid that? So number one, I would say, again, talk about the unwritten rule. So we talked about the unwritten rule at work, and I'm again going to share that example of, I also had a manager at one of my previous company who would, when we had a one-to-one meeting, by the way, we were living in different continents, so our only one-to-ones were over Zoom. So when
Wow.
we had a one-to-one over Zoom, which was our only chance to catch up, that person would not make eye contact, would not ask me how I was, would literally stare at her keyboard and just type, and just throw things at me. And that was essentially our one-to-one. And so at the end, I barely had time to ask a question. The one-to-one or always started late, always finished early. It was a mess. It was bad. And so when I talk about the unwritten rule, I'd say the unwritten rule is, when you join a meeting, you look at the person in the eye, even over Zoom, look at the camera, say hello, say their name, ask them how they are. So those are the basics. Then we talk about the interruption. Also do not over talk. So making sure nobody's over talking, and so that everybody has equal share of voice during the meeting. So those are the unwritten rules, but they're important because some people just don't need reminders sometimes. The second thing I would say to managers who want to avoid situations of depreciation is paying attention to the small stuff. So according to a study from Hive, women are more likely than men to do non-promotable tasks, or tasks that are beneficial to the organization but do not result in career advancement. So, for example, they are assigned 55% of office housework, and only 10% of men do office housework. By housework, I mean taking notes, booking holiday parties, ordering office supplies, or serving on low-level committees, for example. And so that, paying attention to who does what, who is the person in charge of ordering the next baby shower present for the colleague who is pregnant, who is the person booking the next team building activity, who is the person or arranging the next team building, or whatever, because you'd be surprised that often it could be the women or the people of color, which is completely unfair, of course. So paying attention to the small stuff is another way that leaders can prevent situations of feeling unappreciated. And another one, which we talked about, is give all employees a voice every day. Now, some employees are introverts, some employees are extroverts. So some employees will need more of a push and an open door invitation. But also, again, non-surprisingly, there is a study by a Yale psychologist called Victoria Brescal. She found that male senators with more power, they spoke more on the Senate floor than their female senators. And so the speaking time, again, over and over, we know that women speak less in meetings. And if they do, they are seen as more aggressive, And if they don't, obviously that's not good for their career either. So women face kind of that double penalty. So it's very important that leaders really monitor who speaks in meeting and observe people's dynamics. We don't want to have a meeting of 10 people and it's only the two same people talking over and over. So the leader needs to bring in the introverts, make sure women and men are heard equally, people of color, white people are heard equally, LGBT plus, different ages. We want to hear different voices. That's very important. And one last point I would say as well is educate leaders and hold them accountable every day. So educate leaders on what they can do to support all groups is very important. A lot of leaders nowadays are young. They are millennials. So the first job out of university, they've never been trained on how to manage a team. So they need a lot of training on how to manage a team internationally, for example. So those are all steps that I think are very important for leaders, managers, to avoid situations of employees feeling rejected or unappreciated.
I love that you've given such great, real, actionable items for us to really think about in terms of leaders in the workplace. And then also, I really value what you shared in terms of the research as it relates to women. I have a colleague, we did a speaking engagement probably a few months ago at this point, and she shared something I really loved. She called it being voluntold, and being voluntold to be on different committees and being voluntold, especially as women, right? How do you, or what advice would you give to a woman who's listening right now, or a minority that is listening, someone that's a minority that's listening right now, that's saying, okay, how do I go about making sure that I have voice?
Yeah, it's super important because it's going to hinder people's careers if people keep, and I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of having done that my entire career. Keep saying yes. You're seen as the yes person. You keep saying yes because if you're a woman, you've been raised to please people. You've been told to please people and to smile and to say yes, because if you say no, you're seen as aggressive, and people don't like aggressive women. So for women in particular, but also people of color, if we keep saying yes and then we're going to be seen as the yes person, it's going to hinder our career opportunities, because things like glamour work or stretch assignment are not going to be offered to us. They're going to be offered to the other people. So I think it's very important to push back, to position yourself as someone who is interested in glamour work and in stretch assignments and in career advancement opportunities. I completely understand if you're in an organization, in a team that feels like you're a bit scared of the repercussion, if you're a bit scared of what are people going to say if I push back on taking notes, if I push back on scheduling the next meetings, if I push back on organizing the next team party, what's going to be the impact? I'll say, of course, it depends on where and you have to approach this with, it's sensitive, because you don't want to have to, suffer negative consequences. But I'd say, depending on the relationship you have with your boss, try to explain what your reasoning. Maybe in a one-to-one, say, actually, I did in a one-to-one, say to your boss, I've noticed I've been often volunteered to take notes at meetings and to order the next gift for the baby shower party, etc., and bring some evidence. Say, this is the email, that's the other one, and I've calculated it takes me 10 hours per week to do all these things. And those are 10, almost come with the business case. Those are 10 hours I'm not doing my work. And then it has an impact on my work, my productivity, etc. So, come with a business case. And I genuinely believe that if you do that, if you push back with the business and you explain how it's impacting your work and the organization's performance, your manager should understand and split evenly, because most often it's an unawareness situation. There is a lot of bias, of course, but making them aware, because most of the time managers are not aware of all these things. So, and try to stay calm. I know it's very difficult because it's very difficult when we are the one asked to do all these things, but trying to stay calm and focus on a positive outcome, trying to approach the situation with a growth mindset. I think that's what that's the advice I would offer to the women listening to us, people of color listening, any minority who keeps being voluntold to do things. I would tell them to do that. Absolutely.
I love how you talk about the value and the importance of mindset. I will tell you guys, Perrine has an amazing TED Talk. You have to watch it. And I highly recommend, watching it and sharing it with your workplace, sharing it if you're a professor and you're in the communications or business departments. This is really a wonderful TED Talk to share in the classroom with your students to really teach them the importance of inclusion and belonging and the table that we're going to talk about in a moment.
Yeah.
With Perrine, you talk a lot about, and I love Dr. Carol Dweck and her work in terms of fixing growth mindset. How important is that in regards to the creation of a really inclusive workplace?
Yeah, the growth mindset in particular, absolutely, it's so important. I mean, Carol Dweck's book and talk, TED Talk, have been just so inspiring, I think, to many people. If you haven't watched her talk, Carol Dweck, please watch it now, her TED Talk. Essentially, she's teaching that anyone can learn anything, that nobody's born with a set amount of talent, no one. Yet a lot of us believe that. And so I believe that inclusive leaders have a growth mindset. I generally believe inclusive leaders, inclusive professionals have a growth mindset. What does that mean in concrete word? It means that they're constantly seeking improvement, self-improvement. They are aware that they are not perfect and they need to work on becoming better in a way that, so when they approach a discussion or a confrontation, they will approach it in a way that, what can I learn from this? So if someone disagrees with them at work, they will approach with, okay, let me try to understand what is their, what experience did they have different from mine? What makes them say that? What can I learn from their point of view? So they always believe they can learn and improve. And it's key to create an inclusive workplace, because as we know, creating an inclusive workplace takes time and constant effort. And it's something that you have to do every single day. So if you have a growth mindset, you're going to be willing to learn. And if and when you make mistakes, because you are going to make mistakes, because we all make mistakes, then you're going to apologize, learn from it, and move on. So yes, I believe the growth mindset is key to creating an inclusive workplace. And the idea that anyone can learn something all the time is key, not just for inclusive leaders, but also people in their team, sort of, again, approaching conflict, because conflict is a reality. It happens every day at work and even in our personal life. So when we approach conflict with generally a growth mindset, saying, what can I learn from this conflict? What can be a positive outcome for both of us? Genuinely, it's going to change the dynamic of the discussion, of the conversation. So in summary, the growth mindset is really key to creating an inclusive workplace.
I love that. And you talk a great deal about that within your TED Talk and the importance of ACT.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what ACT is. I feel like you've touched on it throughout this talk, right? But I love what Perrine has shared in regards to the value and the importance of what she's cultivated in terms of ACT, because it's also about us, I feel, taking action.
Yes. And so I'm going to give you the very short summary, because obviously I think it's a 12-13 minute TED Talk, but and I like the acronym because it sticks in your mind. So the A is for acknowledge your bias. But also for articulate your goals. So we all have bias, so acknowledging our bias, articulating our goals. So saying, and I'm specifically in the context of a workplace, your goals might be to, for example, give equal voice to everybody in your team, for example, or to have 50% female in your team or whatever. But it's really important to articulate your goal, because once you have a goal, you can measure it. The C is for change your mindset. We talked a lot about changing a mindset. to what can I learn, how can I approach this in a way that I can learn something. And the T is for take real action, because it's great to have goals and it's great to change your mindset, but if you don't take real action, things are not really going to change. So I use this ACT acronym because it just sticks. And again, it's a great sort of 3 steps approach to becoming a more inclusive leader.
And is so important in terms of, I really value the dynamics what Perrine is sharing in terms of really giving an assessment in terms of oneself as a leader, and then also thinking about how to be proactive along the way to really cultivate an inclusive workplace. You also talk about, I keep on referring to the table. Now everyone's probably like, what is she talking about? So, so talk to us, because we often hear having a seat at the table, right? What do you mean, and why is it also very important in terms of a person's journey as it relates to inclusion?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. Again, I like to use the table analogy because it sticks to your mind. I believe it's easier to remember. But essentially, I use this motto to summarize my message, which is invite everyone to your table and they will bring everything to the table. So we all know this say, they bring everything to the table. We know it's in a metaphoric way, bring everything to the table, meaning they're going to really give everything they have. They're going to be 100% engaged. They're going to give everything they have. They're going to bring everything to the table. It's a way of saying, right? So, but I genuinely believe that when we invite everybody to our table, meaning in a figurative way, but also in a real life way. When we invite everybody to our table, and by everybody, I mean people from a different gender, people from a different ethnicity, people from a different age, people from a different sexual orientation, people from a different religious background. When we invite different people to our table in a real way, but also in a figurative way, those people will bring everything to the table. And by that, I mean, if you are the one who invites people, you build bridge rather than building walls. You invite people to join that meeting. You invite people to join that lunch, to join that team building activity. You invite them to join that project. You make them feel heard and seen and valued. They will bring 100, 200% to the table, from a pure productivity perspective, because studies demonstrate that when people feel included, they're more engaged, they're more productive, and the organization is more performant. But also from a moral perspective, making sure you invite everybody to your organization. You don't just have the same people from the same gender, you don't just have people from the same ethnicity, but you have a nice mix. It generally benefits everybody, the society at large, the organization, the people. Everybody feels better for it. So it's a very long way of using that table analogy, because I think it sticks to people's mind, is when you invite everybody to your table, they will bring everything to the table. And I believe it's true in the workplace, in a society, and in our personal lives.
Well, I will say this. I want to invite everyone to Perrine's table. And I want to be able, I want you to share how, and well, actually where we can find you in regards to online, across social media. So many of the Courting Happiness listeners can start to come to your table.
Oh, thank you. So just if you search my name, which I know is a difficult name to remember, but Perrine, and then Farque. That's my website, which is perrinefarque.com. I'm on LinkedIn, just search Perrine Farque. I'm on Twitter, Perrine Farque, and I'm on Facebook, Perrine Farque, and I'm also on Instagram, Perrine Farque. So if you just Perrine Farque me, you'll find my website, and I'm on social media. I'm really easy to reach, so you can connect with me, send me a direct message. I will reply to you. I'll be very, and of course my book is on Amazon, so it's the easiest way to find it is on Amazon, and you just search inclusion, and I think it's the top results. Yeah,
absolutely. What we're going to do is we're going to have a link to Perrine's book right on episode page. So you will be able to conveniently purchase her book right there on the episode page. You'll also be able to conveniently watch her TED Talk on that page as well. We're going to actually supply a link to her talk. And I honestly, it's really a must watch. So I have one more question before we end, and that is, because courting happiness is also about committing to one's well-being journey, committing to your happiness. I always like to ask our guests what they're doing to commit to their happiness. So what are you doing to make sure you're committing to your happiness?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I had to think about it because you are kind enough to send me the question beforehand. And so I had to think about it. And I really thought, do you know what makes me happy? It's really what makes me happy is when I invest in my personal growth, my personal learning and development. I love learning, generally love learning. So, when I learn from experts in your field through workshop, audiobook, podcast like yours, a podcast, a workshop, an audio. I love listening to audiobooks, webinars, coaching. I love sort of becoming there is this idea of becoming a better version of yourself. And I think we all have the version of ourselves we aspire to become. And sometimes we have the version of ourselves that, the kind of the lazy one, the one kind of stuck in the, and so I love investing in my personal growth and development to reaching my aspired version of myself. So working with a career coach, for example, with a speaker coach recently, listening to audiobook, listening to your podcasts, things like that really make me happy because I'm becoming a better person. I'm becoming a better version of myself, essentially. So yeah, that's what makes me happy.
Well, I will say this. Thank you so much for listening to Courting Happiness, our podcast. And thank you today for helping us all become a better version of ourselves. Perrine, you're phenomenal. I love the book in terms of inclusion. So important. And so are you and your work. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kortni. Such a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Let's continue this conversation online. Email us at podcast@drkortnialston.com. That's podcast@drkortnialston.com. Join us on Instagram at Courting Happiness. Don't forget, that's courting with a K. Also, I hope you join our private Facebook community. You can find us at Courting Happiness Podcast Community. Our private Facebook group is a safe haven to share, meet more people looking to build positive relationships, focus on well-being, and create a happier life. Now, are you ready to spread happiness? We hope you subscribe and share this podcast with your family, friends, coworkers, and all the important people in your world. We release a new episode every Thursday. Congratulations on your continued commitment to your courting happiness journey. Thank you so much for listening. We want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. We can't wait to see you next week.